I'd like to remind you that for more Microsoft webcasts, you can go to microsoft.com/webcasts. Thanks again for joining us for today's presentation, an in-depth look at SharePoint Server 2007 search technology. Now it is my pleasure to introduce today's presenter, Matt Hester, who's an IT Pro Evangelist with Microsoft. Matt, you now have the floor.
Oh, thank you very much, Heather. Once again, everybody, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. My name is Matt Hester, and today we got a great technology we're going to talk to you about around our search technology inside of SharePoint Server 2007. I'm telling you what, folks, if you've never seen it, hang on to your hats. You're going to see some great things that we've done, especially for those folks out there that have looked at, prior versions of Microsoft SharePoint Search or using shared services. How did that all work? And they weren't the best indexing engines. We've totally revamped a lot of the work that we've done, and I'm going to show that off to you today and kind of give you an idea of what it can do and how it can do things for you above and beyond, and also kind of give you an idea how we at Microsoft think of search. And when you do a search across your enterprise, what kind of information might you be looking for, and how do you actually find that information today? And I'm going to talk about technology and how we work with it. So one of the questions you might ask today, or you need to do some searching on the internet, is that, hey, I need to find all the Q&A from today's webcast. Well, one of the things I do for all the webcasts that I deliver live is I'll take the Q&A log at the end of the webcast today, and I'll scrub it down, get rid of the names, and get rid of, shrink down the questions a little bit, and make sure I get all the technical information for you. And I'll post it up on my blog for everybody to look at. And I've already posted my blog in the Q&A. It's blogs.technet.com/MatthewMS. And if you need a visual, here you go. You can always get a hold of me on that address. So if you ever need to drop me an email or a line, let me know what's going on. Your blog entry from that. But also one of the things, folks, if you want the Q&A log from today's webcast, as well as some links around SharePoint search technologies and some additional resources, give me about a week, and I normally will take the Q&A log, get it all cleaned up, and throw it up on my blog. Hopefully by the end of next week, you'll see that for this particular webcast, as well as some additional links to help you out and support some of the things that we're doing. So definitely check that out. So let's go ahead and get started with today's stuff. What are we going to cover? We're going to cover really what is centralizing information. How do we think of that today? And when you think about your organizations, where's all the important information? And why do we search for it? We search for information simply because we want to make better informed decisions, right? We want to be able to do our job. We want to be able to find something to help us to do our job, or the thing that we are going to find is the job that we have to do. Well, how do we find it? Our information today is not centralized, and we'll talk about that. How do we look at some of the enhancements that we put in for the end user? How do we work with those things, as well as administration improvements? Some things underneath the covers that you're going to see benefits from. So if you work with prior versions, you're going to see a great deal of enhancements inside of our products today. Really, if you have any experience working with Windows networks, or you have familiarity with SharePoint in prior versions, it's going to definitely kind of help you in some of the conversation. But I'll do my best to kind of make sure that we're all on the same pace as we go through the webcast today. I'm telling you what, folks, it is a great technology. So we're going to start with just kind of what are some of the search challenges that we all face, and just kind of run this by everybody to see what's out there. And then we'll jump in and see some of the end user improvements and some of the other cool technologies that we have. Before I get started, I want to ask everybody a question, though, is how many of you are looking at search solutions for your business today? They could be, definitely Microsoft solutions or non-Microsoft solutions. Are you looking at not looking at Microsoft, you're looking at everybody else but us, or you're not looking, or you might be wondering, do we have search solutions? And I put that last question in because from a standpoint, folks, not a lot of people understand that as a company, we have an end-to-end search strategy. And it has nothing to do with the competitive nature of the environment we're in today. It's something that we need for our computers. So we have everything that goes all the way from the desktop, all the way up through the enterprise, all the way up to the internet. And our future strategy looks even brighter. And I'll spend a little bit of time towards the end and just kind of mention that. Kind of give everybody kind of an idea of the results. It looks like most of you are looking at solutions, both Microsoft and non-Microsoft. A couple of you are not aware of some of the Microsoft solutions that are out there. So that's okay. My job today is to actually inform you of that. And what was funny is prior to this release of SharePoint, we didn't even show up in Gartner's Magic Quadrant of having a search technology. I guess the puppy wasn't enough for all those folks out there, right? Well, the puppy probably wasn't enough for most companies when they define enterprise search. So we actually have some dedicated platforms I'll spend some time talking about in a little bit around our search technologies. So got some great stuff to talk about today. And let's go ahead and start with looking at some of the challenges. So thank you for your answers. I have a couple more polls that we'll go through today throughout the webcast. So Think about this. What's one of your bigger challenges inside your enterprise, your businesses today? You have growth of information. I mean, there are tons of studies that talk about how much data is growing at an individual level inside your organizations. And a lot of the studies that I've seen, folks, they talk in terabytes. They don't even talk in gigabytes anymore. Gigabytes is too little. But how much information we're using, seeing, and leveraging throughout our lives inside of digital worlds are in the terabytes. It's very easy to get to a terabyte when you think about where's all that information that we work with every day. You know, it's in our heads, it's in our email, it's on our web shares, it's on our public folders, it's in our business applications. It's everywhere. We have this information we have to get a hold of. How do we get a hold of it? All we know is right now it's growing, and it's growing at a tremendous rate. What are the challenges we have? Large amounts of data in lots of different locations. You know, and you think about your desktop here for a second. I mean, how many of you have the nice, pretty folder structure in your desktop to help you find files? And then on your data drive, it's a little different. Then you have your email, and then you have all the pretty folders in the email to help find all that information. Right? We have this large amount of data, and that's just your local data, right? What about all the stuff on the network? It's everywhere. How do we work with that? But we have this mission-critical data that we have to find. You know, prior to really some of the search technology we built in, I'm willing to bet everybody's desktop looked like mine. I had an icon mosaic going on, right? I had all these icons covered up my desktop. Couldn't even see the picture in the background, right? Because all my very, very important documents, where were they? They're on my desktop. All right, I've gotten out of that habit of working with it. I don't need to anymore. My biggest challenge today, working with this large amount of data, is remembering that I have a search utility that's going to help me find this data. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. But think about it. You got databases out there. You got your business applications. You have your SQL databases that might have business intelligence stored inside of it. How do we find it today? Do you have a complex client you have to log into to get inside of? You have email. You have to find that information. You have your folders. That's where we have all that information. You know, that's one of the challenges. What are the challenges we have? Complex to admin. All right. Now, a question I always like to ask here, and kind of give you just to think about it. A lot of people say, you know, Matt, we don't have a search solution. You know, we don't have a desktop search solution. But if you let your companies browse websites, how many of you how many of your clients have downloaded the Google Desk Bar or the MSN Toolbar on your desktop? Are you aware of that? Are you managing that today? Does that make your life more complex as an administrator? Yeah, most definitely. All right, these are things that you have to be aware of, that if you're not solving the problem, users might be solving the problems for themselves if you allow them to go to that location. But because things have been hard in the past, things have gotten easier. You're going to see some of that today. At the end of the day, when you think about this, when we spend how much time we look at information, and I think some of the figures are staggering, the amount of time that people spend just looking for information. And I think I even saw a number that, you know, it equated to almost like $5 billion a year the average organization loses. And I don't like the word loses. I would say $5 billion a year is what the average company spends on searching inside your organization. If they don't have a search solution, that's what lost time equates to, right? People can't find the information to make timely changes. Or how many times have you thought you found the right information, only to find out it wasn't up to date and you made a misinformed decision? Happens all the time. These are the types of things that we have to try to look at challenges. Where's that data? The one thing I want to point out as we go through this, and when I think about this just for a second, and this is an IDC study that kind of scared me a little bit, but it's the absolute truth if you think about your world today. When you think about this large amounts of critical data in multiple locations for a second, the study came out and basically said that 75 to 80% of your company's data is not even on your network. It's on people's drives. It's in people's personal emails. It's not backed up on a regular basis. It's not protected. Well, how do we find that? How do we break down those silos? Okay, you have to be aware that your users store a lot of that information, or it might just be in their brains, right? How do we work with these? So let's talk about how do we meet these challenges. How do we look at all this data that we have that might be in Siebel, might be in your SAP, might be people, might be email, might be file shares, might be somewhere. How do we deal with all that influx of information inside organizations? We've got to have a centralized repository or a kind of a way to search all that data. We have to have a central location where we can look for all this data. That data may be spread across your network, and it's okay it's spread across your network. But we've got to have some kind of centralized way to look for that information. And we have to have an index to be able to do that, right? That's the nature of a search solution. At any level, we want one index that can help us find all this information, or a combination of indexes to find all that information for us. Got to be flexible and accurate, all right? You know, at the end of the day, I don't care how big your index is. What I care is that when I run my search across your network, it finds the document that I need to find right then and there. Relevancy. You know what? And it better be easy. And more importantly, when you think about your businesses today, it better be flexible to my business. It better be customizable to my business, and it better be easy to do. Because if it's not easy to do, are we going to use it? Nope. These are the types of things that we have to get inside of and actually work with it, and they have to be fast, right? I think when you think about a little puppy dog, it would normally find your documents. It might take 3 days to find the document. It would find it. And the joke, I think, to some standpoint with some of our solutions, and I used to, back in the day, and I think this is a product group mantra, right? I don't know this, and these do not reflect the views of the corporate, right? But at the end of the day, guess what? It would take 2.3 seconds to search the internet, but it'd take you 3 days to find anything on your hard drive. All right? How many of you in that? How many of you just gave up looking for documents and just recreated the wheel? So, it's faster for me to retype this document that I know somewhere that I can't find. Has anybody ever done that? Am I the only one? These are the types of things that we have to be able to do, and we have to be easy. It has to be easy to your users' environments. All right? So what are some of the things that we look at when we think about implementation of search solutions across Microsoft's platform? So a little bit about the strategy here, folks, is that we have brand offerings that go across all the different layers of information that people are looking for today. They're either going to be on your desktop computer, it's going to be on your network somewhere, your intranet, or it's going to be on the web. Really, when you think about it, that's all the information that we need on a daily basis is going to be in one of those 3 repositories. Well, from Microsoft's perspective, we have solutions right now that are very loosely tied together. Trust me, it's going to get a lot better. That will search the desktop. If you use Windows Vista, you have a searching tool built on the desktop. If you have XP, you can download the Windows Desktop Search. And folks, if you downloaded the original version and saw your performance get sucked away by the tool, re-download the new version. I will tell you it's a much better citizen. It's actually a service now. It's not a user mode application. They've done a lot of improvements in the area. But also, when you think about the intranet second, how do we find that data? In SharePoint 2003, we had a good indexing solution. It wasn't great, and it wasn't that easy to administer either. So we had to look at some improvements, but we had search solutions across that. Now up on our web, we have Windows Live Search, right? That's what we've had for some time, and I will tell you, folks, I'm very honest with you, I used to be a Google user. I've been like Microsoft a little over 7 years, and up until about 2-3 years ago, I was nothing but a Google user. Well, we've changed those engines, and I haven't had to go back to Google yet. It's not so much that I don't need against them. I haven't needed to. I'm very much like a lot of you. Find the right tool for the job and use it. And I found that tool in Microsoft Search product. You have to take my word for it. You'll have to test it. Okay. So you want something that's consistent, familiar, and you want a search atmosphere that's prevalent, right? You want it everywhere inside people's environments. You want better relevancy. The biggest reason why a lot of people didn't like 2003 is relevancy was changed. We didn't really have good ways to do relevancy. One of the things that we did under the covers in 2003, and some of you may be aware of this, that we had an implied or. So when you typed in search criteria, you would say this or this word. Well, we've changed that in 2007. It's an implied and. So when you put 2 words together, it says you want to find this word and this word. Just by doing little changes like that, we've increased our relevancy results, by huge percentage points. But we've also done a lot of improvements under the covers with all 3 of the teams, from the web team to the desktop team and the SharePoint team, combining these engines with the research to make sure we have the right relevancy algorithms. Because once again, folks, it's not how big the index can be, although we can have a large index. It's how relevant are the results to my organization. I'm going to show you some things today, folks, that are not only going to help you find that information, but one of the things about relevancy that's interesting to me is that, to every organization, the word relevancy is going to mean something different. And when I search for the word like marketing or HR, I might have my internal representation of what relevancy means. I'm going to show you some ways inside of SharePoint where it'll help you find that information. When people type in the word marketing or HR, what is the top website they go to? Well, that tells you what's the most relevant to your users. I'm also going to show you a way how you can actually add in your own keywords. So those bubble up to the top. So people see those as best bets inside your organization. Things we never really did before, we now can do. We also have to have functionality at the people level. How many times do you ever say, go ask Bob. Bob knows the answer. Or go ask Joe. Ask Joe's boss. But I can't remember Joe's boss right now. All right, how many times have you ever done that? We have to be able to look across people inside your organization as well. We have to be able to find the right person to do the job. Sometimes it's not about finding a document. It's about finding the right person who can answer my question at that moment in time. All right, these are the types of things that we need to look for. We also need to look at data inside of our business applications. Think about Siebel, or think about your SAP, or think about your CRM applications, your HR web applications that you have today. And HR is kind of a weird one. We'll take that one off the table right now because from a security perspective. But think about the amount of data that's in those applications. Okay, I couldn't find it in my internet search. Now let me go ahead and fire up my Siebel client, log into it, and try to find the information inside there. Okay, now I have to go into another interface. Now I go into another search interface, whole other set of rules. Do you like doing that? And I'm willing to bet your users don't like having those multiple interfaces as well. We have to have a central repository that searches across all those indexes. And as you guessed it, as you probably imagine, well, Matt's ticking off things that SharePoint can do. You betcha. SharePoint can not only do all the documents that have improved relevancy and all that stuff we've talked about, websites, public folders, shared folders, and all that, with no lines of code. None, zero. No lines of code, folks. I can actually have SharePoint index your people information as well as index your business applications. You're going to see an example of that today and how it actually works in a thing called the Business Data Catalog. And we'll spend some time on that in a little bit. But we can have that one central repository that spans those three areas. And where we're going in the future, folks, what if I told you down the road that our search solution is going to include things that are going to reside in the desktop where you'll have one index, one search window. A user will be able to bring up one interface that will search across their desktop, the internet, and the web in one seamless interface with no extra clicking. It's all built in off that central repository. Today, there's not a single client in the world that can do that. All right, there's things that might, it kind of does this and that. And even ours is loosely tied together. But guess what, folks? We're going there. Microsoft has a huge strategy behind this about making your lives easier to make it work better. So we're going to talk a little bit about the SharePoint side today. But trust me, it's going to get even better, okay, inside of our environments. So what are some of the things that we did to make your lives easier for your end users and fundamentally for us, right? First off, we revamped the ranking engine. We always allow for more specific search results. It's just some things we did under the covers that people would find documents, and the document they wanted to find might be the 10th or 20th in the list. Well, the way we're looking at the results now, we've totally revamped. We've totally rewritten that ranking engine to actually bubble up the results that people really want. Once again, relevancy is king here, right? We do a search. We want a document that matches those criteria as best as we can. Lots of relevancy algorithms put in. I think last time I checked, and I even wrote an article, and I mentioned like 2 or 3, and there's several. We're talking in the 20s or 30s, just different ways we change the relevancy algorithms that we can utilize both information that we've learned about businesses and information that we've learned about the web. Because one of the mistakes or one of the comments I hear a lot of times say, Matt, I search the internet this way, that's exactly how I want to search my business. And the rules between searching the business and the enterprise are fundamentally different. One is the way we crawl the internet is very different to how you're going to crawl the actual web or your intranet. And you want to make sure that there are different crawling engines that we have to have, not to mention the indexing. And really the most important bunch of these is when you do a search on the internet, folks, you're doing search anonymously. All right, you're running that search anonymously across the environment. How do we govern security? So when you look at internet versus internet searching, so the intra versus the inter, right, they are fundamentally different at a philosophical and a technical level, right? We have to look at these things differently. Just because it works on the internet doesn't mean it's going to work in our business. Now, with that said, there are some things that happen on the internet, especially around some of the relevancy and how we handle search criteria and words and phrasing that we can bring into the business. But for the most part, you're talking about 2 very different ways that we crawl and index and work with data. We also have to be able to look at people and expertise. We have built in a dedicated tab for just people finding. Now, this actually will use your LDAP. It's an LDAP-friendly information. We definitely recommend Active Directory. However, if you have a non-Active Directory scenario where you have a third-party program, as long as it knows how to speak LDAP and it's LDAP compliant, guess what? We can bring that data into SharePoint to index it. And I'll show that to you today. We can actually bring this information, and really any LDAP directory will work. Now, we'll tell you, if you have a non-AD environment here, folks, it does get a little, there is a little bit of work involved on the backside to make sure that data comes in and gets ported in properly and it gets indexed properly as well. We also are going to group the results by social distance. What does that mean? We're actually going to be able to tell you when you do the search, is this person one of my colleagues? Is it a peer? We're also going to be able to show you inside those results who is this person's boss, who's this person's boss's boss, and up the chain. We're going to be able to kind of give you all this, because if you think about Active Directory and you think of most LDAP directory structures, they normally have an organizational type criteria saying this is my manager and this is my manager's manager. We have that structure. We're going to be able to show this to you. And I'm going to show you this here in a moment. So you're going to see all this stuff today. Business data search. What about your business applications? SharePoint 2007 can actually do business data searches across your business applications very, very nicely. It can do information, breaking down all those silos. Nobody can do this right now except for us, right? Think about this. You have your SQL applications, you have your SQL applications, you have your Oracle applications. Yeah, I said Oracle. All right, because any data store that's going to be structured is going to be on a back end stored in a big database, right? Well, how does SharePoint get to that? As long as that database application knows how to speak ODBC or can be bubbled up in a web service, which, by the way, that's pretty much every data service we have out there, folks. Guess what? I can get a hold of it via SharePoint, index it, and present results to a user. So what are you saying, Matt, that users don't have to bring up their Siebel client or the SAP client to look inside those databases? Nope, not if you index it. We can actually give users basic functionality to be able to work with and find that information right from within inside their search engine. Right from inside the same engine that we find a document on our shared folders or our public folders or on a website internally somewhere, we can actually give them business data results as well, app data that's coming from the application. All right, code-free. Not a single line of code was written in these demos. And folks, for those of you who've been to my sessions before or seen me present live, I'm not a developer. Hello World took me like 15 times to get right. Most of it was spelling errors, to my credit. Most of it was spelling, not syntactical. But the thing is, we don't have to write any code to do this. And that's a little bit, I'm going to put an asterisk by that. Let me actually kind of draw a little bit of an asterisk here so you guys can understand. A little bit of a star by this one, and I'll explain why here in a little bit. There is something you do have to do that's going to look very much like code, but it's not code, all right? But trust me on this one, it's not that big of a deal. The great thing about this business data is when we bring it in, it brings up a conversation is that now I have it in, what do I want to do with it? So I found the data I'm going to work with. And really, when you think about this, and this is how we look at data inside of Microsoft, when I find data, that's part of a 9-step process, right? Once I find that data, which is steps 2 and 3, I got a need, which is step 1, and I got to find it. That's steps 2 and 3. Find and do the search and find the data. The rest of the steps down that chain are analyze that data, possibly do some work, modify, correct, whatever I need to do. You're going to do something with that data. So you need a platform that not only allows you to find the information, but also allows you to be flexible in how people can modify and actually work with the data. Because at the end of the day, folks, this is what they're going to be doing. That's how much they found it. That's it. Oh, Ray, I found 20 results, and the top result was a typo, and I'm not going to click on anything. No, they're going to find a result. They're going to click on it, and they're going to do some kind of work. Whether that's modify a document, add an entry into the database, modify the entry in the database, they got to do something. All right. This is where you have a nice integrated environment with SharePoint that brings to bear all the tools that people use. Office, Excel, it's all that kind of stuff that's built in, and that integration is strong. Better yet, if you need to customize these things for your businesses, you can do it. And the Business Data Catalog is a great example, and you're going to see that today. As a matter of fact, let's go ahead and take a look. So we're going to look out here. We're just going to take a look at the end user usage of what the SharePoint looks like. Our next demo, we're going to talk about some of the admin stuff that we can do to modify and work with this data. But we're going to show you the search, just kind of the UI, as well as the people and the expertise for this. So let me go ahead and bring up my virtual PC. And my virtual PC has a little bit of everything into it. It has AD, it has Exchange, it has SQL, a live communication server. It has a little bit of everything inside of it, so it's kind of my own little canned search environment. You're looking right now at the shared services. I'll come back to this. This is the administration part. We'll come back to that. I'm just going to hop over to the Search Center. What you see here is the default website with one addition. It's this thing called the Customers tab. I'm going to talk more about that here in just a little bit. But one of the nice things about this is that this is what the interface looks like. Nice, simple. Most search engines need to be nice and simple. So I'm going to go ahead and do a search here across all sites. I'm going to look for the word office. Now, some of you are probably going, Matt, there goes your typing again. You misspelled that. I actually did this one on purpose as I'm waiting for the results to come back. As it comes back, what do we expect this to happen, right? You think about the Internet for a second. Does the Internet let you misspell your search criteria? Hopefully not. And hopefully when you do it across the Internet, well, I know this is not true, is that you do find results with those misspellings. So one of the great things that we have here, and give it a second, it's chugging away, it's going to come up and notice this little thing we have. Hey, did you mean this? Right now, if I would have had any misspellings, I would have still seen the results. I'm going to go ahead and say, yeah, that's what I meant. I meant office. And give it a second here, and then it's going to run my search across that interface. You know, it took 1.74 seconds. All right, pretty fast when you think about the results that we can find just looking for that word office. This is how the search interface works. Now, before I go any further, I want to explain some of the things that we've done to enhance this interface. First off, you can change you can change the result pages of how they look, simple web parts. But one of the nice things, I don't know if you noticed, over here it says right now results by relevance. We can do modification date, or notice we have these two options over here. We have Alert Me and RSS. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the Alert Me, and I'm going to talk about RSS here in a second. What does Alert Me allow me to do? It allows me to save and subscribe to this search. What's that mean? Well, that means I can actually send up, and right now I'm logged in as a system account. I'm logged in as an admin. What can I do? Well, if this index changes and a new result comes up in this Office index, guess what? I can get an email. Say, hey, here's a new result setter, or here's some of the new records that have been added to this. And I can actually have daily summaries or a weekly summary. How often you want this data, you can actually subscribe to your searches, folks, so you get an email. So when your data changes, when more data gets added, guess what? I, as a user, are going to get notified. Now, that's one way you subscribe to it. Now, for the folks that are familiar with working with blogs and those side environments, you actually saw the other way, and that's with RSS. So if you have a RSS reader, a real simple syndication reader, guess what? You can actually use that to help subscribe to searches as well. So if those things changes, we may not even have to come back to the search interface. You know, maybe there's a regular search that you run on every week. Guess what? You can subscribe to that and have the results sent to you in email or however you want it. Pretty nice when you think about being able to work with that data. But this is just part of the criteria. All right, this is just part of the information I want to look for. So what if I want to look for some people inside my environment? So I'm going to go back to my search center, and I'm going to hop over to people. Now notice what I've done. I have modified this home page a little bit. Now, I don't have a lot of people in my particular demo environment, but one of the web parts that we actually have built into the SharePoint environment is a web part called Site Users. This is a web part that basically pulls present information. So if you had a large environment, you had a lot of users, a member of your SharePoint sites, most of you have an intranet location, and most of those folks inside your intranet are members of those sites, I would actually see their presence information right here. All right, from an online to an offline perspective. Now, this is just one little web part I added to kind of give you an idea of what you can do. But one of the nice things about this is, let me go ahead and do a quick search. I'm just going to do a search for John, just for fun. All right, I know I need to find somebody named John. Go ahead and click on search. Give it a second, and notice I find a couple results. Now, if I had pictures inside for these folks, I'd see their pictures as well. But notice what we have here. It says, how do you want to refine your search? Do you want to look for just, I found a couple of people named John, lead installer, graphic designer. What department do you want, operations or IT? Notice what it gives you, just based on the LDAP information that's coming into this environment. And by the way, this is how is this index actually created for people? You actually import your LDAP directory into your SharePoint environment. So there's a little bit of maintenance involved on the back end to make sure that you update your changes as people change inside the environment to create that link. And it's a very simple, I've seen tons of little freeware scripts out on the web to do this. But imagine how easy it is to find information of what we want. Now, I found a couple people named John and John Chen and John Emroy. But you know what? I was really just looking for graphic designers. So I'm going to go ahead and click on graphic designer here on my left. And notice what it shows me. All right, it shows me just everybody named John who is a graphic designer. Well, wait a second. Why did it add John? That's what I told it to do. Now, what if I'm just looking for graphic designers? Let me go ahead and get rid of the word John in my criteria here. And make sure I got everything spelled right. And let me do another search. Now, what am I looking for here, folks? I'm actually looking for metadata behind that information. Notice how we present a way to search that metadata. I could have looked for, all the different metadata properties like author, date and time. And all I have to do is just put the title of the column I'm looking for, followed by a colon. There's a whole advanced search reference to talk about all the different metadata properties. Because when we search for things, folks, it's not about sometimes the contents information, but sometimes we need to find properties of that information. Our desktop engine, as well as our SharePoint engine, allows you to do those types of metadata queries and so on. Think about it. What if you're in a law firm and you want to find all the documents related to, legal case 512, right? Well, how do you find that today? And would you be willing to bet that across a law firm, those documents are probably pretty well spread out, but they probably have a piece of tag or a piece of metadata on those documents that this is law case 512. Well, guess what? You can do searches on that metadata, folks. As long as you have that metadata stored, we can find information based onto it. So notice I have my John, and I also have Mr. Wang right there. I'm going to go ahead and click on John. Kind of give you an idea what it looks like when I actually find a person. Now, inside of here, we have John's My Site, which everybody you can choose to give a My Site to or not give a My Site. If it doesn't have a My Site, it will just show you some basic results. But I have the My Site. Notice what it does here. It shows me if there's any colleagues. It shows me a distribution list. This is just the default result page, folks. It also shows me organizational hierarchy, social distancing. Where's John in relation to Patricia, who's the boss? He's a couple layers down, but notice, here's what happens. It shows me that social distancing information so I can find out all the other people that might be related to John, including their manager and their manager's managers, and actually look at them. So let's say I want to go up to the Chief Technology Officer, Chris here. I can click on Chris, and it's going to show me, once again, that social information and move me up that chain and kind of show me who's below and who's above that different level and give me all that basic information about that user. Pretty nice when you think about some of the capabilities that we have built in to search. This is the people searching capabilities. Be able to look for information or look for people that can help you with that information. Let me head back to my home site here real quick. And let me show you the last piece of the puzzle that we have. And this one's a phenomenal piece of the puzzle. I'm going to go to search. Then let me go to customers. And inside my customers tab, I'm just going to do a look for the word bike. Do a quick search. And look what I found here, folks. Now, it looks like I found a bunch of websites. And if you look at the different websites, they all have a different name: Bike Goods, Bike Boutique, Bike Universe, blah, 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 right? I find all this information, and they look like a bunch of URLs. But I want you to look closely at the URL results that I have. Looks like I have, okay, a Moss, looks like a port number going out to a website, admin, content, reseller key. Databases have keys. What am I actually looking at here, folks? You're actually looking at business data results that, in this particular example, are coming from the AdventureWorks data warehouse. I've actually brought that in as part of my business data catalog for me to work with. What am I showing you here? This is actually business data. So let's say I click on Bike Universe. This is happens to be my top result. What is it going to show me? Okay, I'm actually looking at real data coming from a structured database source, SQL in this case. And once again, folks, as long as I can get to it with an ODBC or a web service, I can pull data. I've even had a customer pull data from a mainframe, bubble it up through a web service, and I was able to index it inside of SharePoint with no lines of code. Phenomenal types of results. Now look what I have here. Now I have modified this page a little bit just to kind of give you an idea of what we can do here. For the most part, your default profile is going to give you this basic information about who they are, their contact information, customer contacts. I've added in this web part for any presentations regarding this. I've also added in a couple of the Excel services web parts, and it's something I don't have time. As a matter of fact, we have a dedicated hour-and-a-half webcast, and we've done it in the past just on Excel services and some of the built-in computational stuff we've done with SharePoint, which are very, very nice as well. But once again, it comes back to that. I found what I was looking for, and now I need to do some data on that. And I might just be looking at the numbers to analyze them to understand what's going to happen. But notice what I have here inside these results coming right from the database. I have the ability to do a couple things. I can look at a profile, which is what I'm doing now. I can create a service request, email the contact. I can view a map, basically where they might be, pardon me, inside the organization. But there's one thing you have to understand. Let's talk about this for a second. This data is coming from our index. Do I want to modify this data in an index? No. Where do you want to modify it? You want to modify it in the actual database itself, right? You don't necessarily want to modify it here. To that end, I'm going to hover over the thing that says just edit the customer. Notice down in the lower left-hand corner of my bar, it has a dummy website reference, and that's what the default will do. We do not make a decision for you inside the SharePoint environment how you're going to modify this data, mainly because we want that to be flexible to you. And what could you do here? What kind of things would you give to your users here to be able to edit this customer? You might write a little script that when they click on this, it actually opens up their desktop client. So let's say this data was coming from Siebel or SAP. You might write a little script when they click on that. it fires up the desktop client, asks them to log on, and then they modify that client, takes them right to that home page. Or you might have a web interface into that application. You might have that link redirect them to. Or another way, and I've had customers do this, and we have a couple articles up on the website, so another clever way to do this is instead of giving somebody a different client or a different look and feel, what if we just gave them an InfoPath form that routed all that information back into the real database? In other words, folks, you have an InfoPath form tied into the actual database that's making the modifications based on the information we pass it. You can do these types of things, and for those of you who've ever worked with InfoPath, it's not that hard to do as long as you have permission to create that kind of connection between the InfoPath application and the actual backend database. In other words, it's up to you of how you're going to let your users work with this data. You found it, great. We're going to provide that to you, but now we're going to let you make those decisions of how you let people modify that data. We're also going to let you make the decisions of how do you authenticate and authorize folks to be able to modify that data. And there's a little subtle change that happened in SharePoint as a whole here, not just search folks, that really makes this authentication authorization story become even more flexible. One of the things we actually use now underneath the covers is the ASP.NET authorization authentication model. Now, what does this do? Real subtly, folks, in prior versions of SharePoint, we required Active Directory, right? You had to have Active Directory to make it work. We were tied to Active Directory at the hip, which meant if you wanted to work with data inside of SharePoint, you had to have an AD account. Customers really didn't like that too much. They didn't like just that sole choice. It was kind of a mitigatable type of result. But what we did in SharePoint 2003, because we went to the ASP.NET model, guess what? We now can actually use SQL as an authorization authentication mechanism as well. So users can live in that SQL environment. So maybe you want to let a business partner in to look at some business data, but you don't want them a part of your Active Directory network. Well, guess what? You now have mechanisms to do that in SharePoint in general. So these are some of the things that we can actually do with SharePoint. Now, the last thing I have to mention, and this is just to hopefully clear up any confusion, and I'll post this up in my blog entry for this as well. I've written an article on the SharePoint search technologies in TechNet Magazine, but one of the things I have in the magazine is just a simple table that explains the different versions of SharePoint. Let me just touch on that for a second and kind of give you some context around it. We have 4 different versions of SharePoint search products that you can use. And this is where you'll understand the naming convention of Microsoft. We have the base name of the product is Microsoft Office SharePoint Server. We call that MOSS for short, MOSS, just because we like to abbreviate everything we make a name for, right? But we have 2 flavors that are different than the SharePoint Server that you see today. We have Microsoft Office SharePoint Server for Search. The 2 flavors we have there are for Search for Standard Edition and for Search Enterprise Edition. All right, these are dedicated search solutions that are just search products. They do not do people search. They do not do business search. But what they do is basic document and file print search. So if you're looking for just an entry-level kind of search solution with Microsoft technologies, and you just want kind of an indexing solution to compete with just a basic indexing solution, we're not going to go into business or so on, you want to look at the 4 search solutions, and we call those MOSS FS solutions. And there's a standard and an enterprise, and really the only difference between standard and enterprise is how big the index can be. Inside of standard, it's 500,000 items inside the index. Inside of enterprise, there's no technical limit. There's a recommended limit of 50 million items in the index. So that's really the only differentiator. But we have MOSS for Search Standard and MOSS for Search Enterprise. But where I point or redirect a lot of customers to is the full SharePoint product. And the reason I do that is because I firmly believe that when people find something, they're going to want to do something in addition to just find that data, whether that's open the document in Excel or do what we're doing here with the business data and look at the data, maybe modify that customer data. They're going to want to do something, so they might need a little bit more of an extensible platform. Now, the search solutions are extensible, but they're not as robust as what we have here. So the product you're seeing today is one of the 2 editions we have. We have Microsoft Office SharePoint Server 2007 Standard Edition and Enterprise Edition. All right, what you're seeing here today in this demo is SharePoint 2007 Enterprise Edition. Now, why am I using Enterprise Edition? Enterprise Edition is the only version of SharePoint that includes the business data catalog and includes what you're seeing on the screen right here. The Standard Edition will do people search, but it will not do business data catalog. Now, why do I mention that, or why do we talk about in the search? Well, business data catalog, folks, is not just a search part of SharePoint. It's actually its own component. And SharePoint has provisions to allow us to index the business data catalog. but would you be impressed that you could actually tie SharePoint with a web part to a back-end database? And even whether you indexed or not, they're relevant. You can actually have your web part that would just list out maybe all the records out of a database right inside of your SharePoint environment. Presuming a user has permission, they can use this. Now, why do we do this? Quite simply, we just want to offer customers a lot of different flexible solutions for how they deploy search and work with it, but we also want to give it an entry level. And to the best of my knowledge, prior to the dedicated versions of search, Gartner wouldn't put us on their Magic Quadrant list. In other words, you know what, we had to have a dedicated version to qualify as we had a search product or solution. Even though SharePoint always had it built in, it wasn't something that qualified underneath their guidance and so on. So we have a dedicated search solution to help us get into that Magic Quadrant, which, by the way, I'm happy to say that in our product release, we were in the upper right-hand corner of the Magic Quadrant. Good place to be. All right, sorry for the marketing stuff, but I want to make sure that when you see these different solutions out there, you're kind of aware of what's there. So let me hop back and let's talk about some of the other things. But before I go to that, I have a question for everybody. What do you think of our search solutions now? I'm proud of them. I think they're great. What do you guys think? It's unbelievable? Or, yeah, you know, that's impressive, but Matt, you really wrote some code to do that, or did I show you anything new? Kind of see it. Hopefully everybody saw something new or saw a variation of something you've never seen before inside of it. Okay, everybody's like, Matt, you had to write custom code to do it. You know, that's what the typical result. I always have the skeptics out there that, Matt, you had to have done something to make this work. I actually didn't. I did have to create what's called a business data file, and I'll talk about that one, a definition file, to bring in the business data. And I'll talk about and show you what that looks like here in a second. But these are the types of things that hopefully a lot of you have never seen before that are getting exposure to, and you can actually work with. And one of the links I'll put up, and I mentioned before, is the article is kind of the technical details behind this particular webcast. So if you want some more information, you're going to have some great resources for you to look at. So it seems most of you are impressed. A couple of you are like, did I really show you anything? You might be looking for the admin stuff, so hang on. Hopefully you'll see some stuff in a moment. So let's go ahead and talk about how we've improved the administrative aspect of our SharePoint environment. We've done quite a few things here to actually make it work a little bit better for you. First off, there was a lot of SharePoint 2003 issues of how we handled indexing and working with the data. Inside of SharePoint, we have this concept called a content source. And a content source is basically what do you want to index. And that content source can be, you know, any number of things. It could be a website, it could be a file share, a business data application as you've seen here. But in 2003, what do? We tied the content source directly to what is called a scope. And what is a scope? A scope is kind of like a pre-canned filter. You know what? I only want to find all the records that are inside the websites, and you can create as many scopes as you want. But in prior versions of SharePoint, the scopes were tied directly to the content sources, which meant you had a one-to-one relationship. We decoupled that need. So now what happens? We actually have a scope that spans multiple content sources and allows us to control what's actually in the data. We also did something underneath the covers that was something that customers like ourselves and even myself as an employee have been asking for years. In prior versions of SharePoint, well, which search are you using? Are you using the SharePoint Services search or are you using the SharePoint Portal search? Which one are you using? Because they were different. Now what happens is we actually unify that underneath the covers, and basically what SharePoint Portal does is it extends the SharePoint services. In general, with the new version of SharePoint, all we do is extend the existing services to incorporate all the new functionality. In other words, we don't have these separate versions. We just have improvements or enhancements or extensibility built into the environment. Enable full programmability. If you want to be able to code and write customer development, you can do all that. But I will tell you, folks, from a standpoint inside of SharePoint, a lot of folks like myself really just do a lot of things with web parts and work with a lot of those things with web parts. Those are the types of things you can do. Now, with that said, we've also made this easier for your developers to work in as well. There's actually two utilities out there if you need to do some customizations of the websites and the templates and so on. One is a tool dedicated for SharePoint. It's called the SharePoint Designer. It's kind of the SharePoint replacement of Front Page. So I don't know if some of you are familiar with Office 2007. Front Page is no longer in that product suite. So what do? We gave you a tool called SharePoint Designer, designed specifically to help modify and work with the SharePoint sites. For the developers out there, and I'm going to get this wrong, and if I get it wrong, somebody please throw in the Q&A log and I'll fix it up. I believe it's the Visual Studio Webcast Expression Designer, which is kind of the more closer version of Front Page, but it's also for developers to help design better pages. But we've enabled that, and we've enabled extensibility, so you can really, however you want to modify the website, we're going to give you those metrics to do it. Improved scalability and performance, folks. I will tell you that we've really done a lot of work to make the searching indexing solutions a better a computer citizen underneath the cover, so they're going to run better and they're not going to impact your servers from a performance standpoint. We've also improved the scalability, and hopefully when some of you heard when I mentioned 50 million documents in a single index, that is not out of the realms of realistic possibilities in one index. We've made it very easy to scale the solution because we've actually enabled you to put different components on different servers. So if you have a large environment, you can put, I have it all just one server for my demos, but you could put the web, the client interface on one server. You could put the indexer on another server. You could put the query results engine on another server, and then this is all stored in SQL, which yet again could be on several other servers. Because we rely on SQL as a back end, it does improve our scalability of our environment, so you can do those types of things. We've also made it easier to manage your indexes, really just a better experience and better control over this. And one I've already mentioned, decoupling content sources from the scope. You can actually look at crawl logs now, so when we crawl the data, you can find out if something goes wrong, what happened. Was it an access denied message by our crawler, or it just couldn't find the website? In prior versions, this was very hard data to find. We didn't expose it to you readily. So now what we actually do have is a little bit better way to control how the crawler works across those different environments, and we also give you logs that let you know how it's working inside of there. Some very, very nice technology you've put underneath the covers for us to work with. So what about it from a security perspective? What kind of things have we done? First off, we've done something that's very, very, very important. It's called query time security trimming. Now, this has probably happened to you on the web. It's happened to me on the web before across any kind of different engine, is that you've done a search on the web, you get the summary of the results, and you look at one of the results, and it's the perfect answer, right? It's, that is exactly what I wanted, right? And you look at it, the description looks good, and you click on it, and you get prompted for credentials, or you get an access denied message. And at that point, you can't get in. And you're like, shoot, you might have not even shown it to me. More importantly, think about this on an intranet, or an intranet for a second. Do we want those results to even show up for things that people don't have permission to? No. We don't want to see the results at all because it's an inconvenience to us. But more importantly, we don't want to see it from a security perspective. So one of the enhancements we've built into a SharePoint search from underneath the covers is that when we see results that you as a user do not have permission to see, we will not show you that result. We actually will trim it out of the result set. You won't even see the result. Now, how can we do this? Well, access control lists are part of the metadata of a document. We index that. We're going to be able to verify whether you can or cannot look at that data. So we're going to trim the results right there at security time. Pluggable single sign-on. We've actually made the sign-on capabilities inside SharePoint. This is a benefit not only Search can use, but also across SharePoint in general, where you actually have an extensible way to work with single sign-on engines. Depending on what you have, you may be able to tie SharePoint into that environment if you don't want people to go through multiple layers of security to work with different documents. The same with authentication and authorization, right? We want to be able to authorize and authenticate people into the environment. Makes it very easy. And lastly, just one of the great things we've always had inside of SharePoint is that we can do these things at a very granular level. Because a lot of people are like, well, man, I don't want to show up in the results. And my simple answer is make sure the NTFS permissions or the share permissions are consistent with what you have. Most of your business applications already have this ingrained inside of them. Guess what? We have that granular level of security. On top of that, all the different SharePoint security levels that we have as well, we can really secure those documents. More importantly, if people don't have permissions, they are not going to see them, folks. Some nice things that we have built into the security. We also have a completely customizable environment. That search center you see there that you saw today, you can add your tabs in. We're actually going to do a little bit of that work, just kind of give you an idea of how it actually works. You can customize. It's just a web part. It's just a web page and how that actually works. We can also do personalized experiences for each user. So we actually have user interface security control. So if I log out as a different user other than admin, well, guess what? I can control it. So I see different things. So different users are going to see different interfaces based on what their login ID is. I can control this at a very personal level. So, maybe for the HR folks, they have an HR tab to search, and maybe for everybody else, they have a business tab. We can do those types of things simply based on who they are and who they have permissions inside the sites. Okay. We can also create all kinds of custom search applications based off what we have here. Granted, this would take some code to do, but for the most part, folks, it's just a matter of pointing the web parts to where you want to go. The last thing I want to mention on customization, it really speaks to the extensibility of SharePoint here, and it's something that's very powerful. think about this for a second. There's a lot of people when I run into and I talk to about search solutions, I hear a lot of different things like, well, Microsoft only searches, 200 documents, but these other solutions, they search 350 different types of documents and so on. And when I see those numbers, when I see people that say, hey, they have different types, it's how they count their metrics is what I have issue with. I've actually done some research on some other companies that have said, you know what, we searched more documents. They list out the different document types that they search, and they count them, and it's more than ours. Well, I was bored one day, so I went out and checked. And we count Word documents as one. So if we index a .doc document, that's one entry. Well, when I did some research on some of these other sites, guess what? Word 1.0 was 1, Word 2.0 was 2, Word 6.0 was 3, Word XP was 4. They actually counted the multiple versions inside of there. So don't buy in how many documents we index, because folks, if it's a document you have today, our indexer can index it. Period. And if it's not, what do we do here? There's a couple solutions we have for you. First off, our indexing engine is completely extensible. So if you can write your own document, what is called iFilter, to index your own kind of document. You can even write your own what is called protocol handler, which allows you to talk to proprietary data sources. So you could actually maybe have a custom app and a custom data way that you store data that's different than anything else. You can actually extend the search index to actually include and handle that different type of data. Now with that, a lot of our third-party vendors have actually already written several of these iFilters for you to look at. There's one for Lotus Notes out there. There's one for Adobe documents. There's one improvement for zip files. There's all kinds of free add-ins out there that you can actually bring in and load inside of your SharePoint environment, very, very easily. My favorite one is especially a lot of the folks out there that have heterogeneous environments. Well, guess what? There's even one for open office documents. That we actually allow you to, and it's just a free download. These are just free add-ins. Now, some of you might say, well, hey, Matt, those are the same free add-ins for the desktop search. Yeah, those are the same add-ins that we can actually add into SharePoint as well. The indexing engine that we use both on the desktop search and the SharePoint side are fundamentally pretty much the same thing, although there's a lot of enhancements from the SharePoint side to handle the enterprise scalability needs. However, the basic indexing performs the same way. So the same add-ins that you might use for a desktop search solution with the Windows products can actually be used on your SharePoint environments to extend those as well. So we have a completely customizable solution here to really help you work with this data. So what I want to do now is just kind of take a quick step through just adding a content source, add a search tab, how to actually connect to a business data source. I'm going to show you just some of these basics, kind of give you a tour of some of the search settings, and then we'll get ready to talk about a few more slides. Let me go ahead and share my application out again. And I'm back into my environment. Now, how do I actually work with some of the shared settings? So I'm just going to hop through some of the search settings to begin with. So let me hop back over to my administrative website. So here on my administrative website, I'm going to go to underneath search. I have this option that says search settings. I'm going to go ahead and click on search settings. It's going to take me to all the different ways I can control my environment. I'm going to touch on a few here. Give it a second. It tells me how many items I have in my index, what my indexing status currently is, which is it's currently idle. Right now I have currently just 2 defined content sources. How do I add in content sources? Well, let me show you what's already there. So I have local office SharePoint site, that's good. And I have AdventureWorks, that's good as well. How do I make a new content source? Very, very easy to do. I'm going to click on New Content Source. It's going to ask me what I want to actually share, so I'm just going to say, Litware File Share. And let me make sure I show you what I got on my server here, kind of give you an idea what I'm going to actually index here. Just bring up my Moss share to kind of give an idea. I'm just going to create a simple file share. Now I'm going to cheat a little bit because I really do hate to type. So I'm going to say, let's just do AdventureWorks. That's a good one to pick. So I've got AdventureWorks. I can actually say file share and just simply type in my site. And now next time I index, I'm going to index that AdventureWorks location for the data that I want to find inside of here. But notice the different locations I can look for. SharePoint sites, websites, file shares, Exchange public forwarders. Well, folks, that's pretty much everything. And by the way, the SharePoint sites includes other versions of SharePoint. You don't have to have the 2007 to actually index them or work with them. Notice down here, we also can control the crawl settings, how deep you want to go. you know what, I'm just going to do the start address only. I'm not going to go into those different locations. We can do that if we need to. We can also control crawl schedules, how often we actually crawl the data. What are we looking for? Incremental changes or so often. And when you create it, you normally want to start a crawl right away. So I'm going to go ahead and do this just on this location, just to kind of get something chugging. Click OK, and notice it tells me where file share, it's crawling that data, and I can actually work with this. This is how we make a content source. Real simple to work with it. But really the magic comes behind of how we can actually work with some of those things. Let me go back into search settings here. And right now, notice it says it's crawling. My status is working. I can actually make crawl rules, and if I click on this option, kind of give you an idea what it does. I don't have any defined, because normally if you want to define crawl rules, there's lots of ways. We can actually make new crawl rules that allow us to limit or to exclude or include certain types of data or prevent the indexer from indexing or even going there. We can prevent that. So you might be, you know what, I want you to go everywhere in this location except for that one website that we're indexing, just avoid it. We can do those types of things. Notice the default account that's going to be used for the content access. Normally you want this to be what I call the big kahuna account. You want your index to have all the data because we're going to take care of the security trimming on the back end when people do queried results. What properties do I have? It's listed there. Once again, I can go back into the content sources. There's my crawl rules. I also have the crawl logs. And if I click on that, I should see some information. Notice it tells me how often, when was the last crawl, how many documents were actually added in. I can get a general idea based across any of these what's actually happening inside the environment. And I can get an idea of what's happening. Here's my litware file share. Here's what was actually crawled, just the top level sites. That's all that was indexed. So I can find that information. Did my indexer actually index it? And if it didn't, it's going to give me some log messages to find out what's there. How nice is that compared to the prior versions, folks? It's awesome, the types of things we can do. We can also do the metadata. We can control what backend data is queried there. Very simple to do if you want to work with it. One that's really, really nice here, folks, and this one's kind of subtle, search result removal. Okay, so let's say you get a message from somebody saying, hey, you know, people are doing search results and they're getting this document. And it wasn't that they weren't trimmed out. It was maybe the security for the document they're supposed to be finding wasn't set up properly, right? Because we know our users, right? They set up the security on documents perfectly all the time, right? No. The case is we all make mistakes. So what happens here is inside of SharePoint, what happens if a document is indexed and it has the wrong security set onto it? In other words, SharePoint's going to show people the results because the permissions that it sees says you can see this document, but in reality, the user's not supposed to see that document at all. What can you do as an admin? Well, first off, fix the security issue, right? Find that document and fix it. Make sure that people can't, it might show up in results, but make sure they can't get to it because we'll have to wait until the next time we re-index to really officially get rid of it. But more importantly, after you fix that issue, what the main problem is, they have more permissions than they're supposed to, what you can do until it re-indexes, until the index is recreated with that incremental change, you can actually add that as a URL to remove from the results. So think of this as your own query trimming field. So what you can do here is add in URLs for documents or shares you don't want people to look for. So maybe it got indexed and maybe the results permissions weren't set up properly. You can actually add it in here, prevent it from showing up until it re-indexes that environment. Nice way to control those mistakes because we all know that happens. All right. Down here we have our scopes. Scopes allow us to control how much data is there. Now I have a couple scopes for people, sites, and customers. And you might be thinking, hey, that's the same tabs I had across the top. Yeah, it is. Normally the idea here is when you create a scope, you're going to create a custom tab inside of your interface to reflect that scope. And all a scope is saying, let me go ahead and make one here real quick. Scope has two components. First, just the container. So I'm just going to create one called test. I'm going to use the default results page. That's fine. But right now it's just a placeholder. So you have to add rules to the scope. And the rules look very similar to kind of the crawl rules. But what they allow me to do is say, okay, this scope is just for a particular content source. And if I highlight that, it's going to ask, okay, which content source do you want this scope to tie to? Or do you want it all content? Or do you want it just on a basic property? So what it allows me to do is create a scope that could possibly span multiple content sources or possibly span just a single content source. It's up to you of how you can create it, but you can set what properties particular things might equal to. And then you can say, hey, I want to include this or exclude this, and you can add in as many rules as you want for a particular scope. So what it allows me to do is give users a tab that says, okay, this is where you're going to find everybody named John. You click on this tab, and that's where you're going to start. And it's basically a way to say, you know, your search context is going to start here instead of the whole enterprise. We're just going to give you a little bit of filtered location. So think about, you might have a very, very large index that, you know, some people are just going to want all the finance documents. You could create a scope that said, hey, just click here and you'll see all the things that are related to finance. So without them having to type in the word finance, you can do that for them and kind of give them the scopes. But as you can imagine, scopes are for the big categories. Like for me, I have customers, which is my database, people, which is just for the people inside my indexing, and then everything else is for everything else. We have these capabilities that allow us to work with them. The scopes being decoupled really allow us to work with that kind of environment. Very, very nice ways to work with and maintain the search settings inside of our environment. Now, what's the next thing I want to show you? I'm going to go ahead and hop out of here. I'm going to actually go back a site. Actually, I'm going to go back to my shared services and back into my search settings for a second. Now, you notice that one of my content sources was this thing called AdventureWorks. Well, what was AdventureWorks? Well, that's actually my data warehouse from the AdventureWorks sample database that we give you with SQL, or you can download for SQL, I should say. Notice the business data catalog, and what is it here? It's basically a content source that says, you know what, this is data, and I'm actually indexing the business data catalog. Well, where is the actual business data catalog created or stored? Let me show you, and I'll show you how I got into it. Actually, I forgot. I'd go back one more level. If I go into here, notice I have this option that says Business Data Catalog. Let me show you the applications are there, and you'll see a very familiar name. You see AdventureWorks, and if I click on AdventureWorks, what's here? It shows me all the different tables that are available inside AdventureWorks, and if I were to click on one like Reseller, which, by the way, that's what you were seeing in my search results because that's a particular area I focused in on. It shows me all the fields and what kind of values are in those fields and if it had any relationships inside there. But also notice, hey, look at this, actions at a customer. Hey, there's my dummy website. So if you wanted to modify this, you'd go to the actual business data catalog and modify what people can do with these different web parts on the different actions when I look at the profiles of those clients. Pretty nice when you think about it, right? All this data had to get put into our environment. So the question then becomes is, well, Matt, how did you bring in AdventureWorks to be able to be queried inside of here? Well, I had to add it as a content source. You saw that. But before I could add it as a content source, I had to import the application file. So I'm going to go ahead and just show you what I did, because I did this prior to the demos, just because it takes a little bit of time. I didn't want to waste the time on the webcast for this. Now, this says application definition file. I'm going to click on Browse. And let me hop into my C drive real quick, my demos directory and BDC. And I have this XML file that I can import. Now I'm going to try to import this in. It's going to give me an error message here, folks, because I've already imported this particular application once. And you can only do it once for us to work with. And it's going to bring in this file. Now, I haven't written any lines of code, and notice the error is out saying it's already in. That's fine. I'll click OK to that. And then it takes me right back to that application definition area. So what was the file that I just implemented in? It was this XML file here called AdventureWorks. What is it, folks? It's a definition file. I'm going to go ahead and open up with just Notepad here real quick to kind of give you an idea. Now, I know what a lot of you are thinking. Whoa, Matt, you said no code. This is not code, folks. It's an XML definition of the application I'm importing in. So it's technically not code, although it has a very codish feel to it. But really, folks, at the end of the day, all it is a definition of the application. What does that include? What type of database am I connecting to? How am I connecting to that database? What server am I connecting to? And then when I connect to that database, what are the different tables and what are the fields in those different tables that make up the database? It's a definition file for that to work. Notice here it tells me I'm going to use pass-through authentication. I'm going to SQL Server. The name of the server I'm going to is a server called Moss. I'm using AdventureWorks for this particular demo. And then I have my integrated security if I want to use that. And then notice I have my, product key. There it is. And if I look down here, I'm in my product table right here inside the environment. It has product key inside of it, and I have fields, basically, methods for get products and so on. Now, folks, this is not code. This is a simple definition of that application. Now, with that said, I realize a lot of you are going, oh, great, we have to create this file. We actually have some really good guidance on both the MSDN websites on how to actually handwrite this file. Now, with that said, folks, I have never handwritten this file. There's a couple freeware utilities out there in CodeZone and CodePlex, and a couple of the other developer resources. Because when you look at the Business Data Catalog, it's also a very developer-friendly resource where customers like the fact that I can tie SharePoint directly to back-end business data. Well, to that end, a lot of developers out there have written some freeware utilities. The one that I've seen the most, and I've seen the most positive feedback, and when I've played with, is a tool called BDC MetaMan. And it's a freeware utility that it's a little wizard, right? And you point it to your database, you point it to the application, tell what tables you want to query, and it spits out this file. It spits out this XML document to bring in. Its sole purpose is to help you create these XML definition files for the SharePoint Business Data Catalog. Very, very cool stuff. You definitely look at it. It'll be one of the links to the resources for this particular webcast I will post about and work with. So let me show you a couple other things, and then we'll move on. We're kind of close to time here. Let me hop back into my search environment. Let me just kind of show you how some of the basic customizations of the websites work, and then I'm going to play a little bit here with the search interface. So let me hop back to search. So let's say you want to customize this interface. All right. So how do I do that? Well, first off, you have to be an admin of those particular sites. For the most part, it's going to be a site admin. I'm going to go ahead and just say edit the page. And I'm going to see just the search results page that I have that I can work with. Now, if I want to add a new tab to this, very simple. Simply say add new tab. And it's going to give me the metrics over here on the right-hand side, or actually this one. And we'll just say my tab. We'll say my tab. And it's going to create all the pages for you automatically. And I can even put a tooltip. This is my tab. All right. Notice I have my tab, and if I click on it, nothing's going to happen, right? I haven't actually created or done anything with that page yet for me to work with, but that's the first part. You can customize these tabs. Now it's a matter of going back in and modifying, creating the pages that go with that tab. Now the one thing I want you to note here, and I'm just going to do a quick search on the word bike again across all sites. I want you to notice something that happens here, and it's kind of subtle. Notice when I do this, my result pages come up, and notice my tab's no longer there. One of the things you work with when you work with the search interfaces and customizing it, and it's a little bit of, it's not really complex, just something you have to be aware of, is that you have the search page and you have the search results pages. They're two different pages that are inside the environment. So if you want the My tab to show up, you have to add the tab on both pages. So what I do, I'd go Site Actions here, Edit Page, add a new tab, and then I would call it My tab and tie it back to the same kind of pages that I would have in the past. All right. And I misspelled that, but I think you get the point here, is that from that standpoint, you have to add them in both locations if you want to show them up. Just an extra step to work with and actually customize that environment. So they show up on both environments. Now, if I want to edit the pages, I can always come in and edit these pages as long as you have permissions to work with these. Nothing's happened yet. I haven't published the page, so these changes haven't officially been made or changed yet. But I think you get the general idea of just working with those tabs of how to actually set up. So if I go into the Customers tab for just a second here, and let me go into edit this page, kind of give you an idea of what was done on the Customers tab of what I want to do, is notice it shows me the search dialog box, it shows me the results, search statistics, and so on. And notice it says core results. Well, how do I find that? If I modify this web part, where is this coming from? Give it a second to chug. You can actually do some things on this to control fixed keywords, how those workouts see. But if I go to miscellaneous, notice it says what tab I'm going to. Scope customers. Remember the scopes I showed you? This is where you tie the tabs. You modify the page that's associated with the tab to the actual scope. It's pretty simple to do, but you have to have some of that back-end scope created and kind of have an idea of what you want to have from a tab perspective. And really here, folks, I'm a big fan of less tabs if it warrants your business need, right? The more tabs you have, just the more complex you make your interface. And we're talking about a fairly simple concept, but they allow us to do these types of things. And we can control. Notice that this is just a search statistics web part. It's just a web part here called Search Stats. It tells me how many results I have. You don't have to show that if you don't want to inside your environments. But these are the types of things that we can actually work with and modify inside of our SharePoint environment. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on Publish just to create the My tab experience here. And, you know, just because I'm proud of my little, I didn't put it on this one. Let me go back to Search. I think I put my tooltip on the Search one. Notice again, this is My tab. I know everybody's impressed by that. I'm going to go ahead and publish this page as well, make sure it's all checked in and ready for me to go. Now the last thing I want to show you is something subtle around how we work with search results. I'm going to do a search on marketing. I think this is the one I've done it for. Notice what it does over here on the right-hand side. It gives me a star, right? It gives me a best bet. It gives me a keyword. Well, one of the things you can actually do with your search results, folks, you can actually create your own best bets and your own keywords that when these things happen, I want you to go to this. So what are we doing here? You're controlling your own company's relevancy. Fairly straightforward to actually work with. So if I go to Site Actions, how do I actually work with this? I'm going to go to Site Settings. I'm going to go to Modify All Site Settings. And I'm going to go to the top level site settings. This is where you actually modify it at the top levels. And we have this option that says Search Keywords. If I click on that, notice what I've done here. I've created a keyword that says marketing. Let me just go ahead and open it up and show you what it's there. It says if I type in the word marketing, advertising, or promotion, this is the best bet they're going to go to, marketing homepage. And I can actually add in multiple best bets, give some definition information and contact for that, but it allows me to actually give me results in my particular where I want to redirect people to. They do a search on marketing, let's send them to the marketing homepage. At least let's make sure that it's aware to them. So it allows me to kind of control my own internal relevancy. Very, very nice when you think about it, to be able to control what people see and how they work with results. From an admin perspective, this is actually very, very easy to do. All right, just wanted to show that to you. Once again, it's at the top level site settings underneath keywords we can actually work with that data. So let me hop back here for a second, and let me finish up with the last couple things around querying and reporting. One of the nice things that we have built in to SharePoint is the ability to actually find the results. One of the nice things about our environment when we're working with it, or we need to find out, are how are people using our index? How are people looking across our index to find the different data? Right? That's always very important to us, right? We've got to be able to give them that information. We have to be able to give them, what the volume is, what the click-through rates are, where the query ranks are. We also have to be able to give them the results. What are people actually doing through that environment? What are they actually looking for? What are they finding? And then possibly give ways or mechanisms to export this out. One of the last things I want to show you before we wrap the webcast and I take some of the questions that I see have in queue is I want to show you the query results and the query reports that we actually have given you. Now, if you're a SQL Server person and you do some things with report tools and so on, you can create your own customized results. Here's just what we have out of the box. So back into my shared server for a second. So let me go ahead and bring my server back up. Here's my interface. Now I've brought up the Search Queries report. What does this show me? It shows me what my queries look like over the last couple of months. Kind of gives me an idea of volumes over the last 12 months. What was the most popular month? What were people there? Where were the search queries from? What tabs were people clicking on the most? People seems to be my top tab. What were the top queries? Now you'll notice my demo environment here. My top query is John. But I have this information that I can look at. What's nice about this, have you ever had a user say, well, I typed this query in and I don't see it? Well, you're going to see all the results, those top results. But I say, you know what, let me see what they actually typed in. And if I click on John here, it's going to run that exact same query. So I can see the results for myself. So I can see how that index is performing inside the environment. Very, very nice when you think about some of the results that we're going to see. But we also get an idea of general usage, what people are looking at, how many times they're looking for these words across our environment. This might help us find performance bottlenecks. Maybe the network, people are complaining about this resource all being slow. Well, maybe it's the one that's always being clicked through. Well, how do we know what people click through? There's another report over here that says Search Results Report. So I'm going to go ahead and click on it. Give it a second to chug, and it's going to give me the results of what people actually did. So it's going to say, hey, the top destination pages when people found the results, it's going to give you where they actually went based on that. What queries came up with 0 results. Notice my misspelling of the word office. I've done it a couple times. Notice the most clicked best bets, marketing, it's the only one I have. Do I have any queries with 0 best bets? In other words, people have done these queries, but there were no best bet options. In other words, we didn't create a best bet for that. This might be a key indicator for you. Because you know what, maybe I need to create a best bet because this is where people are clicking based on this particular search. You can help define some of that relevancy. And we could say maybe click through with low rate. Maybe this tells us we don't have to index that location anymore. Nobody really goes there. Or maybe there's a way to indicate that people aren't finding that information valuable. Maybe we need to re-architect other sites. This is going to give you great statistical information about what's happening inside your environment. At any time you want to, if you want to export these out to an Excel or even an Adobe file or an Academic PDF file, you can do that here with any of this data. So you can actually take it offline and work with it or see what's there. Very, very nice way to work with our search results. So I just want to show you a quick little demo there, show you how the different search results work. And then I just want to wrap up with a couple things about just some of the best practices that we have around our environments and how we're actually going to work with it. First off, from a planning perspective, you want to take a look at your servers and capacity. Everybody's like, well, Matt, how big of a server do I need to do this index? And the answer is always the same for me. It depends. Depends on how many documents we're talking about indexing, how many users are going to be there, how often they're going to use it, what the average search is. You're going to have to balance this depth across what you want to look at. We also want to look at how search depth works. The deeper you go down the folder trees, the potentially longer it could take to create the index, and depending on the server, it could impact that server's performance. Not a lot, hopefully. I mean, we've tuned it so it's a background thread, but you do want to look at that search data, but you want to balance, how often does fresh data work for me inside the organization? How often do I need to do incremental versus full crawl schedules? All part of that solution. Configuration. One of the nice things about this is you want to define your rules. You want to have, if you have larger websites or internal sites that you want to look at, you might want to have a dedicated server just for crawling those particular sites, which you can do. You can offload the work. Custom configuration. If you need to modify or work with those sites, you can definitely do that kind of work as well. Operationally, a couple things to look at here. Use MOM. If you have Operations Manager available to you, it's a great way to monitor what's going on. Although we have some nice things, crawl logs, MOM's just going to give you a little more robust reports. Fault tolerance, a SQL Server. One of the nice things about SharePoint, we've always recommended this, if you're using, when you have SQL on the back end, use some of the technologies that are built into the SQL Server, especially SQL 2005, around clustering and load balancing that really help enable you to scale that back end much nicer. Okay. And lastly, pause indexes to halt crawling. If you need to halt crawling, maybe something's happening in your network or you're under load, you can always come in and pause that index. You can say, let's take a break for a second, let's pause it, and maybe you start it back up again at the end of the day or whenever it's going to be where you don't have that network load for you anymore. So you definitely want to take a look at that data. So with that said, we looked at quite a few things. I'm going to take a look at questions here in just a second. But hopefully you got an eyeful, and hopefully you saw, hey, wow, we are thinking about this at Microsoft from a standpoint about how we can improve this. And really, folks, you have to test it. Deploy this into a pilot environment. Test it inside of your environment. See what kind of results it does. And see some of the improvements we put around the manageability and the scalability and even just the relevancy, which to me is probably the most important metric, right? I did a search. I found the document I was looking for. We've done a lot of improvements. You're going to have to test it and see it for yourself. Now, one thing, and I'll put this link up on my website. It's live right now. If you want to go back and take a look at through any of these demos, and I will tell you, just because from a time perspective, especially around adding the web pages, there's a little bit bigger of a demo out there. If you go to this web page, the Microsoft.com/technet/DSK-103 website, they actually have links to all the demos you saw today, done by somebody else, but they're streaming links. You can actually go through and take a look at the demos again. So if you want to see the search demo, or you want to see a little bit more of a thorough customization of the web pages, they show you those types of things at that website. And I'll put the link up in my blog entry. And for those of you who came late, my blog is once again blogs.technet.com/MatthewMS. It's also in the Q&A log for us to look at. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Heather for just a second while I get a quick drink of water and I take a look at the questions that are in queue. Heather?
All right. Thank you so much, Matt. And if you do have questions for Matt, go ahead and submit those now using the questions and answers pane in the lower right-hand corner of your interface. And we will be getting to those in just a minute. I'd also like to remind everyone that you can print a PDF of the slides by going up to the File menu in the upper navigation bar. Also, watch your inbox tomorrow for an email with information about viewing this webcast on demand. The email will also include a link to a downloadable PowerPoint of today's webcast. When you fill out the webcast evaluation today, you have a chance to win a Microsoft Zune digital media player.
Hey, is that the Halo Zune one?
Matt, you're not eligible.
I'm not. Am I? I can't win it. Man, that's not right.
All right, so I'll go ahead and put that survey up now. And you should see it showing up in your slide area in just a second. All you need to do to fill it out is follow the links that you see on the screen. And we do appreciate the feedback that you leave for us. It helps us to provide better webcasts for you. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Matt.
Okay, thank you very much, Heather. We do have a couple things here, a couple really good questions. Where can one get the SharePoint Designer? I believe is the question from C. I've included a link. This is where you can actually download the trial. It is there. We also have, and I'm going to put the link for Web Expression Designer. We have the other product that you can look at as well, and I've included both links in the answer for you to look at. So they are products you do have to purchase, but you can download trials to see which one works for you. Question from Leanne. I noticed in your crawl logs it states that some documents are too large to crawl. Is there the same document size limit in 2007? I don't believe so, and I believe we expanded the size limit. I might have hit a couple documents in my particular area, but I believe it's something you can't override. I'll take a look and verify for you, and I will post the answer on my blog. It is a good question, but I know we did some things around the size limits. I'll just have to get you the exact detail here for you, but I will post to my blog. Okay? Good question. CodeZone and CodeWhat, I'm sorry, it sounded a bit muffled. Sorry about that, James. CodeZone, I believe it's CodeZone and CodePlex are a couple ways, but there's lots of little what parts out there that the Visual Studio folks use to store some of the little web apps, but I believe it's CodeZone and CodePlex. I'll put a link to BDC MetaMan up for this particular Q&A log, and if you need it today, if you go back, I've done this webcast a couple times, and I've always put the BDC MetaMan. If you go on my blog today and just do a search on BDC MetaMan, you should be able to find the link to where that's actually stored. Okay? Question. From Salam. I have an architect who recommends set up 2 Windows SharePoint Services boxes and another dedicated MOS for search box. Do I need to set up MOS for search on all machines in order to be able to search the advanced web parts? I understand that it does, that only one MOS for search is needed. Oh yeah, you only need, depending on how big your index is going to be here, you only need that one, and this is what a lot of customers will do. They'll buy that one MOS, the MOS 2007 server, and they'll point it across their entire environment. Those other environments do not need to be 2007 for me to index them. So to create that one central repository. The only limit here, and it's a recommended limit, is that you don't go over 50 million documents in the particular thing. So you can just use one for that. I will give you, for this link, I'll dig up some of the planning and architecture documents so you can take a look at kind of what that looks like from a recommendation. And we have several different kind of scenarios for you to look at. I will give you the planning guide up on my blog and give you a link to that as well. Some really good stuff there. But yeah, you can use just one search, bearing in mind your index isn't too big. Are there any differences in the search function using SQL Server prepackaged with Small Business Server 2007 and SQL Server full version? Well, in our current version of in Small Business Server 2003, we don't have you don't have this functionality, and the version of SQL that's there is, I believe, SQL for Workgroup Command, the version of SBS that you have. There is a difference in the versions of SQL. To answer your question straightforward, yes, there is a difference in the full version of SQL versus that. But what we're talking about here with the SharePoint server, you can't load the SharePoint 2007, or I should say it's not supported, by loading it on top of a Small Business Server. What you can do is add this SharePoint server as another server inside of your SBS domain and make it work. But there are differences. So to answer your question directly, yes, there are differences. And I got one last question for what my blog is. My blog, again, is blogs.technet.com/MatthewMS. And with that, Heather, I'm not seeing any more questions, so I want to first off say thank you to everybody out there for coming and attending the webcast. I'll look for up on my blog for the questions hopefully by the end of the week. If not, hopefully a little bit sooner. Just depends on what I get to in the next couple of days. But I want to say thank you for taking time out of your busy day to hang out with me and talk about search technologies. Heather, I want to thank you for your time as well. With that, everybody, have a great day. And Heather, do you have any last words?
Thanks a lot, Matt. And I do just want to take another second and remind everyone to please fill out the survey prior to exiting the session room. And with that, I'd like to extend a special thanks to Matt Hester for today's presentation. Thank you all for joining us. You may now disconnect from the audio portion of today's conference.